Happy Friday, DawgNation. It's Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm glad you're with us here today. It's another one of those sort of good news, bad news scenarios. We have some good news. Jeff Sintel, a part of DawgNation Daily today. I originally thought he might not be. He's getting ready to start his vacation today. He's flying off to some, swanky beach resort here, but he was good enough to join us by phone before our show started today. So once again, much like last Friday, we are audio only for Jeff Sintel, and I apologize for that. I know that y'all don't love the bait and switch. I wouldn't like it either. It's kind of a weird time of year with the vacations and the travel and things like that. So we're kind of cobbling the schedule together here a little bit right now. We'll be back to normal for the most part. Jeff's going to be gone all next week, but kind of back to normal again after that. So we appreciate your patience on that. You can hear Jeff Sintel, and he had some really good stuff. New information on Trayvon Walker, an update on Demetrius Roberts, and kind of everything in between. It's good stuff from Jeff Sintel, but it is audio only on today's episode of DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza. As far as the video, a lot of your comments here today will kind of be loose and sort of structureless to a certain extent and let you weigh in with a lot of stuff in the program. I've also got some new stuff I want to give you on Demetrius Roberts and some fun stuff here on Zamir White off the top of the show, and a little more reaction to what has been kind of the two big stories of the week. Lincoln Riley's somewhat volatile comments about the Georgia defense, and then Jake Fromm, the continued sort of aftermath of his hand injury. We'll do a bunch of new stuff on that here today as well. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am not going to lie to you. It has been a bit of a weird week for me. I think part of this is because of the fact that July 4th was on a Wednesday, right? The holiday. We were all off. I hope you were and had a chance to be with family and friends. That's on a Wednesday. So you have this schedule where you work Monday, Tuesday. You're off in the middle of the week on a Wednesday, and whoever takes like a Wednesday off, and then you come back and have a regular schedule on Thursday or Friday. It's been so weird that if you were to sneak up behind me and tap me on the shoulder at any point in time this week and say, hey, BA, what day is it? I believe it might take me 3 or 4 minutes to sort of figure that out. In a given day, I have not really known exactly what day it was. My understanding is I've been told today is Friday, so I'm really glad to be with you as a part of this DawgNation Daily presented by Marco's Pizza on a Friday. And given the fact that it's been somewhat of a weird week, maybe I'm in a bit of a weird mood. This is going to kind of be a little bit of a weird show in that normally off the top, we sort of deal with a big subject for a few minutes and kind of unpack everything there is to discuss on that one subject and then sort of move on with some other stuff. Today, it's kind of a lot of different stuff, a lot of little things, and I think they're all worth mentioning. I don't know that anything here is worth spending 10 minutes on, but I wanted you to be aware of kind of everything that's kind of going on. If you're like me and have been kind of egg scrambled coming off the midweek holiday here, let's get you caught up on everything that you might have missed when it comes to Georgia football stuff here from the week. And let me start with, now if you're listening podcast radio, I apologize. This is obviously not a visual medium for you, but I'll do my best to describe this. If you're watching, you're in for a treat here. Really good video coming from Georgia running back Zamir White, the incoming freshman, who we all know. The story here is recovering from the knee injury suffered near the end of his senior season there in high school there in North Carolina. And based on these videos, things are going pretty well here for Mr. White, much like Nick Chubb was recovering from his 2015 injury heading towards the 2016 season by doing some the truth is, I don't know if it's jiu-jitsu or taekwondo or really anything else. I don't know what kind of martial arts this is, but there's some martial arts stuff being shown by Zamir White on his Twitter feed here. And when you see this video, we'll show it to you and give you a chance to look at it, you certainly get the sense that things are going pretty well here for Zamir White. Let me let you see the video for those of you that are watching. Zamir White kind of going through, doing some kickboxing here, some fists of fury, kind of gives a high knee. I love this video where he starts with the kicks, a bit of a side kick, and then what I believe is called a roundhouse kick from Zamir White. I mean, how much do you love seeing this? First of all, let me just say, I wouldn't fight Zamir White for $100 million. He's got this look on his face of sheer determination, showing some agility with the kicks, some agility with the punches. It's kind of a cool looking video because Zamir White comes across as legitimately the toughest dude you've ever seen, which is kind of fun. But it's also kind of a way to sort of show off what looks to be a pretty healthy looking knee there for Zamir White. I am no doctor. I don't play one on TV. I have no idea if there's any connection with Zamir White's health in the videos we just saw there. But it certainly appears to be good news, and it sort of fits in with a narrative that's kind of been out there that Zamir White might be a guy that is able to be healthy and contribute and play for Georgia here in 2018. Now, the debate that we've had on our program a lot is, well, how early would that mean, and how early do you actually need him? Do you need him week 1 against Austin Peay? Is that a showcase for other Georgia running backs, guys like Brian Harrion and Elijah Holyfield, who really kind of haven't gotten their full turn yet as UGA running back? Is that more of a day to find out what they bring to the table, and then maybe you unleash Zamir White on South Carolina in week 2? I don't really know, and maybe this is all sort of a false positive, and maybe it still takes a few more weeks than that for Zamir White to be truly fully healthy and ready to go. But the words that continue to come out when any kind of one of these whispers sort of sneaks out, it's all for the most part positive about the injury recovery of Zamir White. That video there seems to point that out, and if you're listening to the program right now, what we'll try to do is make sure we put a link to the videos when we post the audio portion of the show. So if you just go to the world-famous DawgNation.com later on this afternoon when the show is posted, we'll give you a chance to see those videos if you're listening to the show right now. And, of course, if you are, we certainly appreciate you listening in. And, of course, one of the things that we have listened in on all week is the ongoing conversation that's sort of taken place between Georgia fans about what Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley said. And we all initially react to the tweet from Danny Cannell, who's sort of a noted SEC hater and a bit of a professional troll. And, he kind of comes out with the quote from Lincoln Riley on a radio interview that Riley had done with Danny Cannell on ESPNU Sirius XM satellite radio, that if Georgia played in the Big 12, it would not be a top 5 defense each and every year. And some of the more super serious blue check media folks said, well, hold on. When you hear the full context of Lincoln Riley's answer, it's not quite as bad as it initially sounds to begin with. It's actually a more nuanced discussion. Well, I got to tell you, yesterday on SEC Country Live, we played the full context, the full answer from Oklahoma coach Lincoln Riley. And I'm not so sure that the full answer from Lincoln Riley on the debate that's been going on here now for several days, the notion of how Georgia's defense would fare, we're facing Big 12 offenses every single Saturday, I'm not so sure the full answer changes things all that much. We played this on SEC Country Live yesterday. Seemed appropriate to come back and play it here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza here today. Let me let you hear the full answer from Lincoln Riley. Does it make you feel different about his initial comments? Here he is with Taylor Zarzar and Danny Cannell from ESPNU Satellite Radio. Take a listen.
What's different here is you're facing those offenses every single week. You just don't have that in any other league. Not that you don't have good offense in other leagues, of course you do, but you just don't have the consistency and just the challenge week in and week out that you do in this league. I mean, the Rose Bowl is a perfect example. Nobody all year could move the ball on Georgia, and we had a pretty nice run in that game offensively, and you've seen that in a lot of the. A lot of people had trouble moving the ball against Ohio State last year. You've seen that a lot in these non-conference games, these matchups where all of a sudden these really good defenses are giving up what everybody thinks for this or that, or giving up a lot of points to Big 12 teams. So it is a challenge. We did have some excellent defenses in this league last year. Iowa State, TCU, some of those guys were some of the top-ranked defenses, no doubt. But you go throw Georgia's defense, which was a top 5 ranked defense going into the Rose Bowl, you go throw them in the Big 12 every year, they're not going to be a top 5 defense. I mean, it's just probably not going to happen. And so, the challenges that you face, the style of offenses that you face is definitely a little bit different. But again, I think it's league-wise, again, if you watch kind of where the NFL's headed and kind of where our league's been, I think it's very, very close, very similar to so many of those teams. And I think there's a lot of teams in this league that are on the rise, too. So it's an exciting time for our conference.
There are some non-SEC people or national writers who would tell you, hey, you hear the whole answer? It's not the shot at Georgia that Dog fans initially thought it was. It's a lot more nuanced than that, to use a word more than once that I used a little earlier. And I'm not quite so sure the full answer changes anything. It doesn't for me. I mean, you do hear there in that quote, he brags about the fact that his Oklahoma offense had a pretty nice run against UGA. What he's referencing is points scored in the first half of a game that Oklahoma eventually lost. I'm sorry. That's just a welterweight comment. That is not the kind of thing that would fly down here in SEC country. That's the kind of thing that sort of seems to work west of the Mississippi. Hey, did you see us score a bunch of points in the Rose Bowl? I mean, that's sort of participation trophy language for me from what you heard there from Lincoln Riley. And I think the initial reaction of Georgia fans, even after hearing the full context, at least in that regard, is kind of accurate. But the real story is actually the deeper story. And I believe I touched on this a bit yesterday. When you hear the full answer there from Lincoln Riley, you really get the sense here. This is not about what Lincoln Riley thinks about Georgia. This is about what Big 12 people think about SEC people. And these two leagues could not be more different right now. The coaches that make them up, for the most part, could not be pursuing more different things. What you really have here is a battle going on about what the future of football is going to look like. And this is a relevant conversation here for Georgia fans, because when I'm imagining Georgia coaches speak to Jay Hayes, the graduate transfer defensive lineman that moved on from Notre Dame, initially committed to Oklahoma, my guess is the Georgia coaches probably said, wait a second, do you really want to go play in a pillow fight league like the Big 12? Are they going to prepare you for the NFL draft? After all, how many Big 12 defensive players even got drafted here this past spring? That's probably, I'm guessing, what Georgia coaches were saying to a Jay Hayes in a conversation like that, and maybe that conversation worked. Conversely, as we know, Jaden Hazelwood is somewhat interested in Oklahoma, the 5-star wide receiver committed to UGA. I believe he has plans to take an official visit there. And I'm guessing that Lincoln Riley and the Oklahoma coaches are saying, hey, our offense represents the future of football. Look how many points we're scoring. Look how innovative our offense is. This is what the future of football is going to look like here. So the deeper connection in the storyline and the discussion about what Lincoln Riley said about Georgia is not so much a shot at Georgia. It's sort of that sort of internal strife that goes on in college football right now between the Big 12 and the SEC. And from that standpoint, I think both sides are going to be, very reasonably passionate about this. And that's really the scab that gets sort of picked when it comes to the Lincoln Riley stuff. Now, David Pollack, the former Georgia great, does weigh in on this on Twitter. His thoughts on exactly what Lincoln Riley had to say. Let me show you Pollack here in terms of what he said about all of this. I think Lincoln Riley is correct with his comments. I don't think Georgia would be a top 5 defense in college football if they played in the Big 12, but I think they would easily be the best defense in the Big 12, though. That's David Pollack on that. And I guess my only response to Pollack is it's the definition of top 5 that I have an issue with here. Top 5 in terms of yards gained or yards allowed, points scored, points allowed. That's sort of a passé statistical measurement when it comes to a college football anyway. It's really more about the yards per play data, and it's really more about, the overall scoring efficiency data, more the advanced stats talk. And that standpoint, I think that Georgia will probably line up just fine. Yes, they're going to give up more yards and more points because Oklahoma is a big-time offense. There's no doubt about that. But in a battle of big-time offense versus big-time defense, I think we saw in the Rose Bowl on January 1st that in the end, it was the big-time defense that eventually won out. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented by Marco's Pizza, and we're glad you're with us. No matter how you get to us today, watching us on video live at 10 a.m. on the DawgNation Facebook, DawgNation YouTube page. Also available on the DawgNation Twitter feed as well, on the radio at noon, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form, wherever podcasts are found. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, the world-famous DawgNation.com. Some folks listen right there on SoundCloud. No matter how you get to us, we're just glad you are with us today. Jeff Sintel coming up. Of course, all this made possible by our friends at Marco's Pizza, who remind you to say hello primo with a great offer. You can get 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas right now for just $6.99 each. You can go to your local Marlowe's at marcos.com to find out the location closest to you. Their promise to you is the Italian way in every store every day. And you can check that out at marcos.com. 2 medium, 2-topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. That is a great, great deal. And it is great to have Marco's Pizza as a part of what we do here on DawgNation Daily every single day. As I said, we will get Jeff Sintel coming up in just a couple of minutes. And as I also promised, we're going to continue to kind of sort of pack in kind of everything that's sort of gone on this week, some sort of final thoughts on some of this, and sort of setting the stage for conversations that are going to probably continue next week in other regards. Obviously, one of the things that we have discussed a good bit here on our program is the future of former 5-star wide receiver Demetrius Robertson, who chose Cal over Georgia back in the spring of 2016. Didn't love it apparently at Berkeley, has now decided he wants to continue his college career somewhere else, and we've just been sort of waiting to find out where that place would be. Well, we do get a bit of a cryptic tweet here from Demetrius Robertson about what his future is going to look like, not in terms of where he's going, but in terms of how we might find out about his transfer decision. Apparently, Robertson's planning a commitment video about his transfer. Here is what he put on Twitter in that regard here. I will show you this from Demetrius Robertson. He says, keep an eye on Chiming In Media, I guess is the name of the company here. for my exclusive commitment video, hashtag Supersonic, which is a nickname that he uses for himself here. So my guess is we've got a commitment video coming from Demetrius Robertson soon, although when Jeff Sintel joins us, he's going to explain that, speculating about when this might drop might be a fool's errand here. After all, we are in a dead period right now for coaches. That extends towards late July. I think it's July 25th, I think, when that comes to an end. But that's kind of what Demetrius Robertson's sort of taking a look at right now. There's also some buzz on social media. Some of you have sent this to me on Twitter that maybe Robertson's going to be in Athens this weekend. I can't confirm nor deny that. But it sounds like the buzz is growing here for what Robertson's decision ultimately might be. I was going to talk about some Jake Fromm stuff here, and I want to do more about the Jake Fromm injury. Is it okay if we push that to a little later on in the show here? I have a tendency sometimes to sort of get running a little bit late. And I don't want to short shrift that because I think there's an important thing about Jake Fromm we need to discuss and talk about. So let me push that for a little later on in the show. Instead, let me do this. It's a Friday, which means it's a Kroger Click List Friday here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, as we check in on our Kroger Click List checklist. And there's a couple dates I want you to keep in mind here as we take a look at the Kroger Click List checklist on this Friday. First of all, we got SEC Media Days coming up very soon here. July 16th through the 19th. A little bit different for that event this year. For a long time, it's been in Hoover, Alabama, there at the Winfrey Hotel. It's not going to be in Hoover. It's actually going to be in our hometown of Atlanta here this year. Georgia goes on the Tuesday of that week. So July 16th through 19th, SEC Media Days comes up in Atlanta. Of course, we'll have big coverage for you on that right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, and of course on SEC Country Live as well. All of that goes down. I'll also remind you that if you're looking for a football fix this weekend, check out Bulldogs Game Day on WSB Channel 2 in Atlanta at 10 a.m. They've been doing a great feature as of late. DJ Shockley, the former Georgia quarterback, has been kind of breaking down each position group for Georgia heading towards the 2018 season. That's going to be fun on Channel 2 tomorrow at 10 a.m. for a Bulldogs Game Day. I hope you'll check that out. And I hope you'll check out Kroger this weekend as well, because right now for 4 days only, they've got digital deals on Doritos, chicken, candy, and a whole lot more. You can download your coupons beginning right now, and they'll be running in stores through July 5th through July 8th. So that is going on at Kroger this weekend. I hope you'll check that out. We appreciate Kroger being a part of our Kroger Click List checklist every Friday right here on DawgNation Daily. We're glad you're here, too. We're very busy today. That continues right now with Jeff Sintel. Hope you enjoy it. And for those of you with us on video, let me take a quick moment to apologize here for what sounds like a bait and switch. Just like last Friday, we are audio only with Jeff Sintel today. Now, please don't worry. This is not going to become a regular thing. Jeff is on vacation all next week. So he was good enough to actually join us from the airport before he hops on a plane. He's going to like one of these like super swank, resorts. Let me tell you something. When it comes to Jeff Sintel, you cannot hide that money, man. He takes like 5-star, A+ vacations. He's driving around in, some, brand new luxury vehicle you just peeled the sticker off of. I mean, listen, the recruiting business, it must really, really pay well because Jeff Sintel is living the life of Riley here. But nonetheless, he is on vacation next week. But we did get a chance to catch up with him before he left. So you can hear that on either the radio show for those of you in Athens or for those of you around the world. You can check out DawgNation.com when we post the podcast later on. And by the way, if you're normally a video viewer, but maybe sometimes the podcast is more convenient, go ahead and subscribe using Apple Podcasts or the Android devices, and that way you can just sort of have it in your queue there for podcasts if you indeed ever need it. So, with that said, we've got a lot more we're going to do on our program today. We'll get back to the regular broadcast in just a moment. I do want to take a lot of your comments. And the good news here is I've sort of figured out my issues with the Facebook comments. I sort of had a little bit of is the word epiphany? Is that the right word? Epiphany? Had a bit of sort of an epiphany-like breakthrough on SEC Country Live yesterday, where I sort of figured out where the new comments are populating in the comment section, which is, frankly, I know more than many of you care about. But nonetheless, I feel much better about my ability to read the Facebook comments today, so we'll look forward to doing that. And can I just say one more thing before we get back into our discussion here? When we start the SEC through in a couple of minutes, there is something really pretty interesting and juicy that I want to talk about involving Alabama here. Some of y'all know that, admittedly, I sort of like it when Alabama's dealing with some bad news. Well, I think today there's a little bit of another issue for Nick Saban to kind of deal with. And if you're a Georgia fan, I think this is going to be fun because I think this is in contrast to how things seem to be going for Georgia. We'll do that coming up in a few minutes, and And for now, we'll take your comments. Willie Gray Jr. calling me out, and I think that it's probably only fair to agree with this. Willie Gray says the shirts are getting dusty. I think what he's referencing is the DawgNation retaliation shirts that we unveiled a long time ago. We still haven't started distributing these, and I totally apologize for that. But I absolutely deserve some criticism for that. There's no problem with that. Justin Merritt says, where can I see the Zamir White video that we played early in the program? I tell you what, you can either go back to the beginning of this show when it ends at 11 a.m. I think I'm right about this. If you go over to the DawgNation YouTube page, you can actually rewind that video back to the beginning. Now, don't leave this right now, but I'm just saying, I believe there's a different functionality associated with YouTube where you can actually go back and start that before we actually end. And if it just makes it simpler for you, we will also put a link to the Zamir videos in our podcast when we post it at the worldfamousDawgNation.com a little bit later on. Graham Jones asked about Ben Cleveland. I know there was the UJSports.com report that he had the truck accident. My understanding is that's not a serious thing at all. It seems like he's just fine here. I mean, it's another one of those sort of like attention-grabbing headlines, guy that Georgia fans are certainly depending on and hoping big things for in Ben Cleveland, involved in a fender bender of some sorts, but it sounds like he's going to be just fine. All right, I want to get another comment here. J.C. Howell says running back shouldn't be a concern for anyone at Georgia with DeAndre Swift, Zamir White, James Cook, Holyfield, and Harry, and Go Dogs. Yeah, that's a nice, good-looking group there. No doubt about that. And kind of an interesting contrast to what I'm going to tell you about Alabama later on, where some of those guys maybe get a little upset about having to share some carries. It seems like at Georgia that's not too much of an issue. J.Y. says, B.A., set up a booth at the first game, maybe at Tate Student Center, and give the shirts away. Let us all know how many you have. So that's a fair idea. We could certainly do that. Jay, the problem with that is because we could actually do that very easily. We could go around to Marlowe's and give all these away. We could go to Marco's Pizzas and give all these away. There are a lot of different things we could do to give these away. But what ends up being true about that, Jay, is, and I'm really grateful for the people who sort of check in on our show from all around the world. That's a really cool thing for me. And sometimes they get a little upset when we do sort of Atlanta-only giveaways, when we do Athens-only giveaways. They feel a bit left out, and part of my role here as the facilitator of this conversation every day is to make this show feel as inclusive as it can, and so that's one of those things. Just like Ridge Maxon, how about this? Checking in from Tanzania. If you gave me 25 minutes, I don't believe I could find Tanzania on a globe. I don't think I could. I'm not even sure which hemisphere that's in, but it's awesome that Ridge Maxon is in Tanzania. I'm sure doing great things, and it's really cool that Ridge is checking in on the program here today. Ridge, thanks so much for being with us. That's really cool. Georgia boy Middleton asked, B.A., what's your take on our defense, particularly our starting linebackers? I think there's a very good chance that the outside linebacking core for Georgia looks really, really good. I think next week, and I need to write this down, there's a specific point on DeAndre Walker that I want to make that I think is really important. That I think that Walker is in line for a really both interesting year to see how he sort of grows into an expanded role, but also potentially very good year. I think Walter Grant's much the same way. I just think Grant, he's going to be a huge fan favorite, I believe. In fact, I thought it was kind of cool that a couple people mentioned him, or at least one person mentioned him. We did our Dog Day Q&A earlier in the week about the most exciting player for Georgia potentially in the upcoming season. Somebody mentioned Grant, and they're apparently of the same wavelength with me, that when you think about havoc plays, and you can go if you just Google that term, havoc plays, college football, that's kind of a thing that some of the stat gurus are talking about right now of, combining the number of sacks and tackles for loss and deflected passes, turnovers, kind of combining that all together, and which defenses are wreaking the most havoc. Walter Grant with that big, long arms and tall frame. I mean, he's just sort of built for wreaking havoc on defenses because he's quick enough to get into backfields. And, those big old paws, once they get up in the air, are, going to be able to knock some passes down. I think Georgia fans are going to really like Walter Grant a lot. Now, to add to that, though, while outside linebacker may be just fine, with all due respect to Lorenzo Carter and Davin Bellamy, they're tough to replace, but Georgia may have some horses to replace them, to say nothing of the incoming freshman like Brenton Cox, who I think is going to be on the field and doing some things. I think that inside linebacker, to expect that kind of productivity from this Georgia team this season, that's probably a bit much. I don't quite know that you get there on that this year. I think you may get solid play from Monty Rice. I think you may get solid play from Nate Patrick. I'm assuming he's going to play. I think you may get some contributions from guys like Nate McBride. But, maybe you get a freshman like Channing Tindall into the mix there from time to time. But to think that you're going to, you had a Butkus Award winner over there a year ago. So inside linebacker probably a step back, but still solid. Outside linebacker probably really, really fun. Great question. I'm going to go over to YouTube in just a second. I know I haven't done any of those YouTube questions yet. Mike Massey says, how's J.J. Holloman looking? Yeah, J.J. is going to be one of the real sort of guys to watch once summer practice begins, and we're only a few weeks away from that. I mean, that should get going right there, last couple days of July, first couple days of August at the very latest, and Holloman will be one of those guys that you check in on, because right now, we think we know those first three receivers, right? You think it's Godwin, you think it's Riley Ridley, you think it's McCole Hardman. That's your first three almost for sure. But more guys than that are going to play, more guys than that are going to be on the field. Last year, Trey Blunt was on the field a lot because of his ability to block and be physical. My guess is he's in the mix for more playing time. J.J. Holloman is one of those guys that, from a recruiting standpoint, probably ranks pretty high in the pecking order of current UGA guys at that position. Didn't get a chance to show that really last year, but we've seen flashes from him, like, say, G-Day going back to 2017, for instance. So he's one of those guys that you could expect something from. How does he compare a year older than a guy like, say, Kearis Jackson? But Jackson's built different. As I've explained before, if you haven't seen Kearis Jackson in person, the first thing you're taken back by is, gosh, he's kind of big. He sort of looks like a running back more so than a wide receiver. But that should be very interesting to see. David Duke says Tanzania is in Africa. Yeah, thank you, David. I think I probably could have eventually sort of zeroed in on Africa on that, but if you ask me which countries it borders, I'm not quite so sure about that. Randy Hall says, BA, when are y'all going to be back at the Marcos there in Buford? So I would say that we're almost for sure coming back to Buford here pretty soon. Now, we will start Marcos broadcasts again probably in, I guess our first one's probably the week of the South Carolina game maybe, and then we'll do a lot during the season. One of the best ways to sort of remember this is we're typically at Marlowe's a lot before road games. That's kind of when we're at Marlowe's. We'll be at Marlowe's, I think, like I said, the week of the South Carolina game almost for sure, and then a few more coming up close beyond after that. So we will have a lot of those, Also, we're only a little bit away here from right at the very beginning of August. We'll do our Own the East celebration, our Own the East kickoff from the Crowbar. I don't know, I'm sort of these are things that are not even sanctioned to be promoting yet, but it's almost for sure a done deal that we're going to be back at the Kroger Lindbergh right there at the beginning of August to do our Own the East kickoff. So that's going to be fun. And we get some Own the East videos coming back for you again this year as well. Some people had said, well, why are y'all doing Own the East again? Georgia owned the East a year ago. I think if Kirby Smart were sitting here, the one thing he'd say is, listen, 2017 was 2017. You start off 2018 from scratch. Clean slate once again. You got to rebuild all those same blocks of success that you built a year ago, which starts with winning that division and owning the East here. So we're going to have some fun with that, courtesy of our friends at Georgia's Own Credit Union here coming up pretty soon. All right, let me hit the YouTube comment section for a moment. Chad Cahill, how about this? Chad Cahill says, I can't wait for football season. It's going to be very fun this year. I'm going to have a good time. Can't wait to talk to y'all later. Bye-bye. That's a little bit different comment from Chad than what we normally get. Kind of interesting. Some of y'all have blocked him, but I can't quite figure out what's going on there. Cliff Payne says the Jake Fromm incident's overblown. Got to let kids have fun. Otherwise, they'll go somewhere else, and they will let them. I think that's true, Cliff. I do think it's a big-time recruiting disadvantage if you say, hey, we're the program that doesn't allow you to have fun. We're the program that won't let you go water skiing or anything like that. I think that's probably true. I also think it's true that part of being good at being a leader is sort of leading only the things you're capable of leading. I think authority gets questioned once you try to have authority over something you can't really control. And if you try to have a zero tolerance policy on anything that sort of looks like recreational fun during the off season, you're only tempting people to try to defy those orders. And at that point in time, listen, anybody that's ever been a school administrator will tell you this. Zero tolerance policy is just hard to enforce because there are lots of gray areas and there are lots of, issues where you sort of wish you didn't have to come down quite so hard as you did. A lot of the times that schools get into the media for the wrong kind of stuff always seems to stem from some sort of poor application of a faulty process. And for the most part, I think the zero tolerance policies are pretty faulty. Terry Crews says he thinks Eddie's hand is taped. Yeah, it is. This is sort of like his hard cast in sort of honor of Jake Fromm and sort of keeping in solidarity with Fromm while he's going through his injury. He is taped up here. Absolutely. Jacob Mahaffey. Yeah, there you go. You can see Eddie right here. He's got the hard cast on. He's this is his way of saying, hey, as long as Jake's hurt and recovering, this is his way of doing that. Jacob Mahaffey says Eddie must have taken a swing on Dan Mullen at some point in time. I can't confirm nor deny that. All right, we got more of your YouTube comments here coming up in just a moment. Ryan Mel says, BA, what players from the 2017 class do you think will contribute that didn't really last year? We mentioned J.J. Holloman as being maybe one of those guys a moment ago. I am curious to see if one of these defensive backs, kind of emerges, right? Whether it's, Stokes or Speed or Brini. I mean, Georgia needs some more guys to emerge in that defensive secondary. Right now, it seems like that you've got, probably like 4 guys you feel okay about. Rock solid starter at safety in J.R. Reed. All-American potential candidate DeAndre Baker at one of the cornerback positions. You like LeCount at one of the safeties. Tyreek McGee is a solid defensive back, but you're still looking for another one. And there's a whole bunch of those guys signed for 2017 that would be kind of nice to see emerge at some point in time. I guess I'm also sort of curious to see if Notori Johnson becomes a factor in the interior offensive line competition here this summer. Those are some of the names that come to mind for me here pretty quick. Hard Times 57, to go back to what we were saying earlier about the Oklahoma-Georgia comparison, says a lot of SEC teams would have better offenses if they were playing in the Big 12 against those defenses. That's probably true. I mean, listen, I think in terms of the way that we measure sort of traditional old-school stats, that's kind of a passé idea on this anyway, just counting the number of points you allow, counting the number of yards you allow. There's more to it defensively than that. There is, what you give up on a points per play basis, I should say a yards per play basis and a points per possession basis. That's really more of the true measuring stick there. And here's the other thing. I mean, at some point in time, we need to crunch the numbers on this. How many 4- and 5-star defensive guys do you really have playing in the Big 12 right now? I mean, ultimately, that's what's going to matter. That, it kind of reminds me of a casino for a bit. If you'll permit me here, I'll make a sort of a quick analogy. It's like when you play blackjack in a casino, the house always has a tiny advantage. And it's not a very big advantage. If you're playing like correct basic strategy, it's only about 0.5%, right? But if you sit at a casino blackjack table long enough, every dollar you have will go drowning into that hole of 0.5%. It's just the house advantage that ultimately reigns there. I think college football has the same kind of house advantage, but it belongs to the team with better talent. And I think you saw that in the Rose Bowl. Which doesn't mean that a team like Oklahoma couldn't have beat Georgia. They could have. They did beat Ohio State, and Ohio State's got better overall talent there as well. But the odds are, the longer you play, no matter how unique style of play Oklahoma brings to the table, the odds are the longer you play, the team with the better talent's eventually going to lean on that talent and find a way to win the game. I don't think the Big 12's in the national championship business. I don't. And people say, well, they could have won it last year. They almost did. I think sometimes there's a myth with the almost one, right? Once again, to go back to the casino. You play the slot machine. The jackpot comes up. The next one's not the right number. You don't win anything. You say, yeah, but I almost won. Look at these 2 columns. I got the jackpot symbol to pop up there. And you put more money into the machine. I think there's a near-win myth that sort of populates the minds of college football fans here as well. I don't believe the Big 12 is in the national championship business, and I cannot state that emphatically enough. And if I'm wrong, then somebody can come and laugh at me. Shane Taylor says, how's D'Angelo Gibbs doing? And for me, I think the Gibbs conversation is probably a little bit less optimistic right now than the Natrez Patrick conversation may be, and I can't speak expertly necessarily on either of those two issues, but I think that's kind of kind of the issue. JY says about Eddie that he throws left-handed. It's his non-throwing hand. That's right. Eddie is a left-handed thrower. So his non-throwing hand is his right hand. That's a very good point. Very good point. Shannon Baker says, let me get this comment. He says, what do you think about the 2019 safety Lewis Cine? He's been seen wearing UGA gear a lot, has a great opinion of Georgia. His highlight film on YouTube is awesome. Kids flying around the field. So, Shannon, what I'll tell you is in our audio-only conversation with Jeff Sintel, and for those of you who are just joining us right now, we did talk to Jeff today, but because of some scheduling quirks, we had to do it audio-only on the phone before our show began. You see Lewis Cine there on your screen. Jeff actually visited with him in Texas last week, so we were able to talk to Jeff a bit about that. And Shannon, everything that you bring up does also come up in that conversation. The fact that Cine has been, no pun intended here, seen wearing Georgia gear. I guess you can also add Lewis into that category of recruits whose names I mispronounce forever. I was doing that with Brian Brzee for a long time, and I was doing it with also I was calling him Lewis Sign. Apparently, it's not Sign, it's Scene. So I can say that that there's a lot about Lewis Cine that Jeff tells us here on DawgNation Daily today, so make sure you check that out. Mike Anderson also brings up Tommy Bush as a name worth watching balling out. That should be a lot of fun. Okay, so here's what we need to do. By the way, Philip Jordan Wells says we need more depth in the blind squirrel position, BA. Yeah, I completely agree. I said this yesterday, Philip, that we don't have a Justin Fields blind squirrel. We don't have that. So some of y'all joked about wanting to wrap Jake Fromm in bubble wrap. I may actually have to truly wrap Eddie here in a bubble wrap, because if he goes down, I mean, we have nothing. We are down to walk-ons only if Eddie goes down. So that's a real concern. But we'll have some fun with that for sure. I've also got more of your comments coming up. I want to get back to the regular broadcast now, and here's a couple things we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a story about Alabama that you're going to think is really, really interesting because it's kind of negative, and we sort of like negative Bama news around here from time to time. We'll do that. I also want to have a response to some of the people, weirdly, who seem critical of Jake Fromm coming off the broken hand from this week. I think there's an important point to be brought up about that. So we're going to do that as we get back into our regular broadcast. It is good to have you with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, rolls on right now with our SEC Through.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Always fun to have Jeff Sintel here on DawgNation Daily. I know he was kind of joining us from the airport there. You hear some of those airport noises, and I certainly apologize for that. But you got to understand, Jeff was good enough to give us some of his time before he goes on vacation. After all, we won't speak to him for a week. He'll be gone next week, back the following week. So it's kind of nice to be able to squeeze in and catch up with Jeff right there. That's really kind of a cool thing to be able to do. All right, let me transition here to our SEC Through, and let me remind you to come back on Monday, just like always, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, SEC Country Live. We're rolling through the offseason here on SEC Country Live and getting ready for 2018 season for SEC Country Live. It's going to be bigger than better than ever before. I can't wait to tell you about all of our plans for the 2018 season, but it's going to be great. So the SEC Country video channels, Facebook, YouTube, all of that. We'll see you Monday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time for SEC Country Live. It's going to be a lot of fun. One of the stories that we will no doubt talk about on Monday, and I think this is really juicy. Backstory here very quickly. We have had both Alabama quarterbacks, at least their camps, have sort of addressed the notion of a potential transfer. Averion Hurts, Jalen's dad, talked about that to Bleacher Report a couple of months ago, that if he wasn't the starting quarterback, he'd become the biggest free agent in college football history. Tua Tagovailoa talked about the fact that he was going to transfer after this past season had he not played the national championship game. So you've got real legitimate transfer drama when it comes to Alabama quarterback. That's just been going on. Nick Saban's done his part to try to quiet that. He challenged both these guys, I think, in sort of muted terms, but nonetheless, I think the unspoken message was received to stop talking about this stuff through the media. It's the kind of thing that does not make the Alabama situation better when both these guys, or at least their camps, are going public with discussions about possible transfers. Well, guess what? quarterback ain't the only position where Alabama's got to worry about that. And I'll apologize for the bad grammar, but you get the point here, that they are also dealing with the same kind of thing potentially now at the running back position. Because Najee Harris, who was the nation's number one running back for the class of 2017, one of the top players in the entire country for 2017, a real heated recruiting battle that Alabama won over Michigan for Harris, the running back from California. Well, Harris is back in his home state. He's quoted by the San Francisco Chronicle as saying that he hopes he plays a lot more in 2018, essentially insinuating that it was tough for him in 2017, and even he thought about transferring because he wasn't getting as many carries as he wanted to get in 2017, and he hopes there's more coming in 2018. Now, Harris was a pretty significant part of Alabama's national championship game story, but that wasn't enough for him. I happen to think that Harris is a really good player, and I think that he's probably going to emerge as Alabama's top running back here this season. But these kind of comments to the San Francisco Chronicle do not help Najee Harris at all. And if you're Nick Saban, I think that you are justifiably mortified by some of this. You know, Saban's program, the hallmark of that has been really nobody speaks out of turn about anything. You know, sort of the prototypical Alabama players, a guy like, say, Julio Jones, who sort of went about his business, no diva-like behavior. It was all the team, the team, the team. You have got a lot of me-first thinking and me-first talking coming from Alabama stars. The top players in the roster, Najee here, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts' dad. This is a little bit of a different kind of thing for Nick Saban to deal with, and I'm sure he'll probably handle it and things going to be fine. But, man, that is a different thing to be hearing coming out of Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and if you're a Georgia fan, you love the fact that you're not hearing that coming out of your program. You know, Zamir White, James Cook, Elijah Holyfield, Brian Herrien, that stable of running backs for UGA, DeAndre Swift, they all seem to be very comfortable with how they fit together, at least for right now. You're not hearing the same kind of chatter on that. One of the things we talked about yesterday on SEC Country Live was a USA Today piece with the top 10 running backs in college football, and only one SEC back made the list. Now, you may find it interesting that that back was DeAndre Swift, and obviously Georgia fans hope that he is the top back in the SEC, but sort of weird not to see any of the Alabama running backs on there. Not to see maybe Benny Snell from Kentucky, maybe. You know, it almost seems to speak to what could be considered a down year for SEC running backs. Now, Georgia fans only care about their own guys. I get that. But in terms of how the rest of the league is currently perceived, no superstar feature back at places like Florida, which has had a lot over the years. Tennessee, which has had a lot over the years. Auburn right now, yeah, that's a program that sort of, you know, rebuilds running backs over and over again. As of right now, we don't know who those guys are going to be. I'm assuming they'll find some. We don't know about them yet. Same thing can be said for LSU, who Georgia does play in October. As of right now, there is no obvious answer to the Darius Guy, Leonard Fournette lineage. Have an interesting thing to think about. Also, a couple other quick stories I want to get to. Both these comes from the ranks of recruiting. John Dunmore is a 4-star wide receiver from Florida. He's from Hollywood, Florida. At one point in time, he was a Gators commit, decommitted from Florida, flirted for a long time with Auburn, made his commitment decision this week, and he chose Penn State over Auburn, and I guess you could add Florida in the mix here as well. So a 4-star wide receiver goes up to a Happy Valley here. James Franklin, another example of him doing some good work on the recruiting trail. And for Florida, another example of them just not being able to close their borders at all. Not only are they losing in-state battles to programs like Florida State and Miami, they are hemorrhaging talent to programs outside the Sunshine State as well. I think Dan Mullen finds very early in the 2019 cycle his back against the wall here when it comes to recruiting. That'll be something certainly interesting to pay attention to. And then one final story here, Jimbo Fisher continuing to add some pretty big-time names to his 2019 roster for his recruiting class there at Florida State. And a lot of this has been done with defensive backs. Eric Jones, the latest, a 4-star pickup there for the Aggies. Now, the one thing that Florida State, or I should say that Texas A&M, Freudian slip there, one of the things that A&M has had an issue with is they've already taken like 10 or 11 3-star commits. So as Bud Elliott described this at SB Nation, this is a good phrase. There's a bit of a cap on that class for right now. I think Bud's phrasing on that's pretty good. But Jimbo Fisher bringing in some pretty good talent there for Texas A&M. I'm sure we'll talk more about that on SEC Country Live next week as well. And for now, we'll make that your SEC through. All right, good to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we've got a Dog Day Q&A we want to get to here, and that'll be a fun one. We will do that with you. But let me also backtrack here for a moment, because earlier in the show, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Jake Fromm injury from from earlier this week, and I kind of wanted to respond to sort of a weird pocket of backlash that's out there. I heard some of this on the radio this week in Atlanta, driving around. I live here in Atlanta. Criticism of Fromm of, what's this kid doing in the back of a boat? Doesn't he know that's dangerous? And I just don't think this is the kind of thing that you can legislate. I think it's completely unfair to say that Fromm was in the wrong place, the wrong time, when he got injured on the back of a boat. I think for me personally, if you just want to play the statistics here, I mean, would you tell him he can't drive a car? Because statistically speaking, automobiles are a lot more dangerous than boats are. And would you tell him that he can't swim in a swimming pool? Is that a recreational activity you'd also prohibit? Because once again, statistically speaking, swimming pools are one of the most dangerous, household items that you can come across here. So I don't think Fromm has anything to apologize for the nature of his injury. And while we haven't really heard Kirby Smart's feelings on this yet, we haven't heard from him on this. I think if we did hear from him, we have a decent idea of how he might respond. Because if you want to go back in time here for a moment to, like, say, 2016, when Sony Michel was involved in an ATV injury, it's something that I think is just sort of inherently a little bit more dangerous than boats. And maybe Michelle, you could have more reasonably said, hey, he doesn't belong on that ATV. Kirby Smart, very early on in his UGA career, didn't seem to take that tack with Michelle then. My guess is he wouldn't take the same kind of tack with Jake Fromm right now. In fact, let me go back in time to summer 2016 in the immediate aftermath of the Sony Michel injury, and here is how, it's almost exactly a year ago, ironically, here is how Kirby Smart responded to that then. Take a listen.
Tough injury, tough for a kid who's worked so hard to be in the best shape of his life, but it's part of the game. It's part of things that happen, and kids have mistakes and things happen. So it's very unfortunate for him, but he's in good spirits now. He realizes that he's going to be healthy again. He'll be 100% again, so we're excited about it.
Yeah, so listen, I'm guessing, and obviously it'd be wrong for me to try to put myself inside the head of Kirby Smart here. I won't pretend to do that, but the situations are seemingly similar enough that if Kirby Smart was okay with Sony Michel back in 2016, my guess is he's probably okay with Jake Fromm here in 2018 as well. We were doing a video-only conversation on this on DawgNation Daily a couple of minutes ago, and somebody brought up a good point, that this almost becomes fodder for negative recruiting if you become the program that doesn't let your kids go out on boats, or you don't let your kids go on jet skis, or things of that nature. It almost becomes like the kind of thing that you become the sort of known as the no-fun program. And that's certainly for me, that's no way to win with recruits there. So, I hate what happened to Fromm. It sounds like he's going to be fine. And I just sort of continue to believe that there's not a whole lot that can be done to prevent this kind of thing. All right, before we get ready to wrap up here, let me also say this. I'd love to have you respond to our Dog Day Q&A question here today, either on video. We'll do this live here in a couple of minutes, or for those of you who are listening, hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. We played some pretty cool video off the top of the program of Zamir White, looking pretty healthy right now. I'm curious to find out what your expectations are for Zamir White this season. Weigh in on that either on video or on Twitter to me at DawgNation Daily. It's our Dog Day Q&A today, and I'd love to hear from you on that. But for now, those comments will have to wait at least for a couple of minutes, because before that, we got some business to take care of. As we get ready to wrap up the program here today, I will remind you that a good Georgia fan we believe is a Gator hater. Our buddy Eddie here on the set with us, as always, our unofficial DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza mascot. He's got his hard cast on in honor of Jake Fromm, in solidarity with Fromm as Fromm continues to recover from his injury. And Eddie and Jake Fromm and everybody else know that 113 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jack's, one of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, and we think Georgia gets another win again. That's our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll do that right here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. And a moment ago, I sort of, in a rhetorical sense, asked, for the people who would want to ban Jake Fromm from being on a boat, would you want to ban him from a motor vehicle as well? Well, I guess that's a somewhat relevant conversation. My understanding is Ben Cleveland was involved in a minor accident, but has been reported by UGAsports.com. It seems like he's fine. We'll see you on Monday. All right, so good to have you with us on the program here on video. We will look forward to taking some of your comments here, and I know we took a lot earlier, and we'll take a few more right now. Nick Lurch had a good point, and we sort of mentioned this, I think, briefly yesterday. He says, when it comes to Jake Fromm, I would rather deal with an accident than an arrest. I totally agree. I mean, there is no evidence right now to suggest that some sort of foul play, some sort of alcohol or something like that played any factor whatsoever in what went on this boat. so you contrast that with what we've seen from other quarterbacks, whether it be like Johnny Manziel getting in trouble from years past, or Baker Mayfield, who just about a year or so ago was getting tackled by the police in Fayetteville, Arkansas. You give me a fun-loving young man, having fun on the boat, or, kind of a doofus like Baker Mayfield getting, slammed to the ground by police. I'll take Fromm 12 times over. Wally Roberts checking in with a little fight song language. Like to see that. Jason Bryan Lee says thoughts on Demetrius Robertson. So this is one of those moments in which, when it comes to D-Rob, I believe, based on what I'm hearing from many of you, I'm a little out of step with some of y'all's thoughts. I think that here on our program, because we are, and we use this language specifically for a reason. You'll always hear me say we are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're not the show that's sort of there for the other rest of the people in the media. We don't want to do the show within the bubble of the media. We're trying to get out of that bubble as much as we possibly can and sort of be out there in the real world where the real fans are. So, I think it's always important for me to be able to kind of know what y'all think on certain issues. And I get the impression, based on monitoring these comments every day, live on video, on Twitter, at DawgNation Daily on Twitter, I sort of get the impression that some of y'all are just sort of tired of all this. You've even sort of lashed out at the idea that Robertson would do a commitment video for a transfer. And I'm just not there. I don't have a problem with the video. Even if he chooses another school, I don't have a problem with him doing a video. I mean, I think videos are kind of fun. There's sort of unlimited bandwidth to put these things on the internet as it is. I don't have a problem with them doing that. I think Georgia needs him. I do. I think him coming to Georgia would be a really good thing. I think that having, Blaylock, Robertson, and Hazelwood in a future UGA wide receiving core would be a really fun thing. And I'm not as tired of this story as I think some of y'all are. Now, there's nothing new to report, and I think that sometimes, other than him saying he's got a recruiting video dropping at some point, and sometimes it can become frustrating when there's like a desire for news, but the absence of news. That can be kind of a frustrating combination here. I do get that. But I'm going to say right now the same stuff I said in summer of 2016. In the summer of 2016, I said that Demetrius Robertson, for me, was a prospect worth waiting for. And what he showed at Cal when he was healthy, I think validates that opinion. This is a player worth waiting for. He may not choose Georgia, and maybe some of this is sort of attention-seeking behavior, and, would I want that for my own son? Honestly, that seems irrelevant to the larger point, which is Robertson may or may not choose Georgia, but if he does, he is a prospect worth waiting for, and the kind of guy that Georgia fans would be glad to have in the class. I think he's a good player. I wish I knew exactly what he was going to do, but I do think he's a good player. Funny comment from Willie Gray Jr., who's been kind of on a bit of a roll here today. He says, if D-Rob does come to the Classic City, he means Athens, I promise his first game on the field, I will have an upside-down Cal sign. I wish I had the video to show you here, but when Robertson initially committed to Cal, he had done his own artwork here, and it's one of those sort of classic recruiting images that'll just be sort of burned into all our minds forever. Robertson, who's a pretty talented artist, but the Demetrius Robertson Cal artwork that he had done to sort of show that he was going to Cal had accidentally got placed on the easel upside down. So when you pulled back the big reveal, almost like if the DawgNation Retaliation T-shirt was the canopy over top of it, when you pulled it back, what you revealed was the upside down Cal logo, and that kind of thing does sort of live forever here. I also kind of wonder, like, for the people who may be watching the show with no sound on, and sometimes people do that, like, what must they think we're doing with me with these T-shirts and squirrels and things like that? Sometimes I wonder, for people who sample this for the first time, the weirdness they must think they're seeing when they see all of this. Colt Gotti says, BA, any chance of a DawgNation invasion to the South Carolina game? I don't know if it'll be a full-blown invasion, but I sure would love to do something fun for the South Carolina game. I know we'll be at Marlowe's there that week, probably almost for sure. But, Colt, I'd love to do something for South Carolina. I don't know about full-blown invasion. We'll have to see about that. But we have had some meetings about this kind of stuff so far. Keith Wilson says, what schools is Demetrius Robertson choosing from? So online, obviously you would assume Georgia's in the mix there. They were in the mix before. You hear a little bit about Alabama sometimes. I think West Virginia's kind of in the mix here. Am I wrong about that? I did see where if you go to Robertson's Twitter feed, scroll down like just a couple of tweets as recently as earlier this week, he retweeted, and I don't even know who the kid is, but he retweeted I think it's another wide receiver committing to West Virginia, so I don't know if you read into that at all, but he did do that a little earlier this week. Matt Rukavina, speaking of that South Carolina game, which a lot of you seem to have on your mind, really waiting and ready to see us invade Columbia, Matt says. Take over Williams-Brice Stadium and eat some poultry now. That's good stuff from Matt there. I will say that of Georgia rivals, and I use the word rivals loosely, Williams-Brice Stadium's my favorite. Now, I hate the press box there because it's like in another town. That's one of those stadiums I never want to be in the press box for. I want to be in the stadium. This may not sit well with all of you, but I like the environment there at Williams-Brice. I think those fans do a really good job. I have great respect for a group of fans that not always the best team, but always a really loud, generally full stadium. That's a cool environment. I think that Georgia's going to go there and win this year, but I have respect for what they do there. Kibo Weir asking about Demetrius Robertson or Jaden Hazelwood. Now, my understanding is it's not an either-or situation. It could be an and both. But let's say that just for whatever reason, the presence of Robertson turned off Jaden Hazelwood, then I'd be 100% on Jaden Hazelwood. I like Robertson as an add-on. I don't like him as a replacement for Jaden Hazelwood. And with Jeff on the audio version of our program today, we do talk about Jaden Hazelwood a bit. The Georgia guys, I guess, lost in the finals of the opening this past weekend. But another receiver, and what is his name? I forget his name. One of y'all tell me his name. Another receiver ended up winning the MVP of the entire event, but it sounds like Hazelwood probably does enough to at least remain number one receiver in the country for right now. If one of y'all would not mind reminding me who that receiver was that won that at the opening. Jacob Mahaffey says, any chances for a DawgNation invasion anywhere this season? I think there's a pretty good chance of that. We don't know for sure yet, but I think there's a pretty good chance of that. A lot of these conversations are ongoing, and some of these also happen above my head too, frankly. Okay, so New Level Recruiting, which is Junior Baker over here on the YouTube comment section, says that the guy that just committed to West Virginia is Winston Wright, and he and Robertson are from the same area in Savannah. They played at rival schools. They both have blazing speed. So that's kind of interesting. Another Savannah kid going to West Virginia. I guess you read into that what you will for Robertson's future. After all that, as New Level points out, that is his hometown. Ryan Mel on the 2019 recruiting class for Georgia says this class will be as highly rated depending on how many recruits are signed. Yeah, that's the issue that you're going to kind of run into here is Alabama going to sign more players than Georgia this season, and are they going to use that to have a higher rated overall recruiting class? For me, though, the difference between number 1 and number 2 or number 1 and number 3 is not necessarily that important when you look at the overall sort of like average rank of your individual player. And listen, I'm not going to get into a lot of the specifics on this because we try to be as generous as we can to all recruits, whether they're going to Georgia or not. There are going to be a lot of side-by-side examples of Alabama gets a player from this position, Georgia gets a player, from the same position, and the Georgia guy is just going to be I believe, the superior prospect here. So I think that Georgia is still doing just fine in recruiting, even in comparison to Alabama. I think it was important for Georgia to sort of wrest away the number 1 class last year. There's some cachet associated with that. This year, if Alabama were to get that back, I'm not going to shed any tears when you look at the overall, what I believe to be the sort of average rank of the individual Georgia signees. Alexander Rain says, I said that some of these decisions may be made above my head for DawgNation invasions. He says, BA, what isn't above your head? That's very true. I am just the lowly facilitator of this conversation. I'm just your friendly neighborhood podcast host. All the important business decisions are made by very serious people who wear suits and ties and things like that for a living, pantsuits and things like that for a living. Kyle Ford. Thank you, Santiago. Kyle Ford is the receiver who won the MVP at the opening. How about Santiago coming in with some solid information on that? I apologize. for not remembering it myself, but appreciate y'all for stepping in. That's the great thing about being live on video. Like, I have, in some respects, a pretty good recall ability on a lot of these names. But, I mean, when it comes to recruiting classes, and one of the reasons why a lot of the mainstream media shies away from talking about recruiting, it's just the simple, like, heavy lifting required. I mean, if you want to be somewhat conversant in recruiting, you got like 300 names. I mean, there's what the ESPN 300, there's the top 247 from 24/7 Sports, and I'm sure Rivals has got, some, somewhat similar, rating metric. I mean, you got to know a couple hundred names to be somewhat in the recruiting conversation. And there's always a sort of a following year where there's, at least as many to be thinking about knowing. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the mainstream media shies away from wanting to talk about recruiting. I feel like that I'm pretty good at remembering most of these names. Every now and then, I remember sort of part of their story. I'm glad that y'all are here to sort of fill in the gaps and the rest of that. All right. Maurice Carter says, has Georgia been in contact with Demetrius Robertson? Well, the one thing to remember right now is there's a dead period. Georgia's not in contact with anybody right now. And I believe, I could be wrong about this. Y'all check with Jeff when he gets back in town. But I believe the dead period ends on July 25th, I think. I think that's when the dead period comes to an end. And I'm laughing as I say this because I remember last year, some of y'all were, when Jeff was on vacation, were like tweeting at me all the time, like, when's Jeff coming back? Some of y'all felt like some of my recruiting information wasn't quite on par with what Jeff's providing on a daily basis, but I'll do my best to kind of fill in the gaps while he's gone. All right, so Matt Silvers, and I promise we're leaving, getting off the air here because I know we're running a little bit late. Matt Silvers says, South Carolina fans are the worst. This is in response to me saying I have respect for Gamecocks fans I've ever had to deal with at the moment. I got spit on and cussed at walking to the stadium for the game there a few years ago. So I haven't had that experience, and obviously when you have one of these personal experiences, it's going to sort of sour you. I think that for me and my family, we would say we probably had more of those kinds of things with Auburn fans and Tennessee fans. And it's all anecdotal, right? I mean, every fan base has got its bad fans. Unfortunately, if you looked hard enough, you'd probably even find some of those associated with Georgia. And it's sort of like whatever you've personally had to deal with, it becomes the thing that you remember. But I am sorry that happened for Matt. I've had some of those kinds of issues with Auburn people and Tennessee people. This is like 15, 20 years ago, too, by the way. This is not like last week or anything. But no experience like that with like South Carolina fans. Philip Jordan Wells says, they say the stadium at South Carolina is next to a trailer park. Is that true? It's really like the fairgrounds parking lot, and it's kind of a barren, it's not pretty at all. It's like this sort of like barren, flat land. But, man, you can really get after it and do some tailgating there. There's no question about that. Let me pop over and do YouTube, and then we'll go. So some of y'all are talking about blocking Chad Cahill in the comment section. If y'all need to, if you ever feel like we need to block anybody, from the comment section, just sort of like totally, I think we can do that. That's the kind of thing that I try to be very, very, I think the word is judicious about using. I would not do that lightly, but if there's ever like a really big issue with like the same person over and over again, I would certainly want you to bring that to our attention here. Jacob Mahaffey says, we should just push the time back. We're always running late. Yeah, I mean, listen, at some point in time, the actual sort of unofficial time for this show seems to stretch more towards like 11:05, 11:06 anyway. It kind of reminds me of, for those of you that are old-time pro wrestling fans, remember back in the old NWA days when Tony Schiavone, who ironically I guess is associated with Georgia football now, when he would always be at the end of those TBS broadcasts, like, we're out of time. I always feel like I'm kind of the same way. Coming in as a closeout on this show as well. Cliff Payne, final comment, says, I was born in 1982. I love Herschel, but I get sick of seeing the highlights because it was a painful reminder that UGA hasn't won a championship since then. And Cliff, I'm kind of the same way. I was born in 77, but not really old enough to remember the Herschel Walker years too much. And there was a sense when I was growing up as a fan, like the mid-'80s, and the mid-'80s for Georgia was a lot of close but no cigar, right? You had your chance here and there, and you just sort of let the big game slip between your fingers, and I remember being jealous of what the people who were a little older than me got to experience. 80, 81, 82, even the 83 season that ended with a Cotton Bowl win over Texas. I sort of wondered if that would ever happen again for Georgia. And frankly, I think a lot of us have been kind of wondering that for longer than we care to wonder. But I also think there's plenty of reason to believe that there's plenty of good things on the horizon here for UGA. And in the future, when they talk about the glory days of Georgia football, you may actually be talking about right now, along with the Herschel and Dooley era of the early 80s as well. And, of course, here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, we hope to be here to cover it all for you every step of the way, every single day. Thanks so much for being with us. If you want to hear Jeff Sentell, today's a great day to check out the audio version, our podcast. It'll be posted for you on all the various podcast channels right after we're done here, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Y'all have a great weekend. I'll look forward to seeing you on Monday, 10 a.m., for another episode of DawgNation Daily Live, presented by Marco's Pizza.